Hey everybody, welcome back to GR Research. We are again in the listening room, and the reason we're in the listening room today is because it's nice and warm in here, and it's freezing cold out in the shop right now. It's early in the morning. I haven't been out there yet to turn the heaters on. There's about a foot of snow on the ground out there between here and there, and I'm not looking forward to going out there. I figured this would be a good time to shoot some video footage here in the morning before things get rolling too heavy around here. So this episode would be episode 5, and we're going to be talking about power cables and power distribution and power conditioning and things like that, and how that relates to everything. If you've been watching some of the footage of the earlier episodes, you'll understand, or you should know by now, I'm trying to get it through you guys' heads that wire is not wire. You know, there is properties going on there, and I'm breaking it down into the fundamentals. Hopefully you guys can understand it's either an antenna in one direction, or it can be a filter in the other direction. And that's what's really coming into play when we start talking about power cables and removing the noise from the line. The first place you want to start with removing that noise is right from the wall socket. And I know a lot of you guys out there have heard, oh, your electricity goes through miles and miles of cable until it gets to your house, and you think that the last 4 feet of cable is going to change anything. No, that's the first 4 feet of cable that your system sees. It's the same as saying my water that comes to my house goes through miles and miles of pipe before it gets to my house. Do I think the last 4 feet of pipe under my sink is going to change the way the water tastes? Yeah, the last 4 feet it goes through a paper filter and then a carbon filter. In some cases, a reverse osmosis filter. The last little leg of the trip there, it goes through a filter. That's exactly what's going on with the power that's going to your system. The last thing, or the first thing that it sees, is going to be a filter, ideally. And if you guys are not there yet, you're missing the boat. You've been listening to those flat earth guys tell you that wire's wire, it won't make a difference. And I'm telling you, don't be fooled by that. The difference will transform your system. And I'll share with you the first time that I was really blown away with power cables. It was back in 2002. I was hosting a little DIY get-together at a facility in Wichita Falls, and a bunch of the guys had come over to GR Research. Had a big facility there in Wichita Falls, had a big anechoic chamber, had a nice listening system set up, and a few of the guys were there listening to my listening system, and Dave Elledge was there, and Dave listened for a while and said, man, that sounds pretty good. Your speakers are really nice. You mind if I bring in some of my power cables? I thought, sure, Dave, bring in some of your power cables. I'm open to listening to the system with your power cables in it. So he says, this one is my 14 gauge cable, and he dropped it in on the amplifier. And I'll tell you now, on the amplifier is where it makes the least amount of difference. Where you're going to get the most amount of difference is right on your front end gear, your DAC, your transport, or your streamer, your preamp. That's where this stuff's going to make the most difference. The amplifier is usually further down the list as far as how much difference this stuff makes. But he dropped it in on the amplifier, and I had no idea what to expect. I had no expectations, and just thought, okay, we'll give it a listen. And I was astonished. I couldn't believe it. The bass response was tighter, cleaner, deeper. The vocal region was good. The sound stage tended to open up a little bit. I thought, you got to be kidding me. How in the world can a power cable do all this? And then Dave says, want to hear my 12 gauge cable? And I thought, okay. So I'm thinking, now there's an expectation I'm going to hear more of what I just heard. Like, I'm going to hear more control in the bass, more extension, more of everything I just heard. Wasn't the case at all. The vocal region got better. The upper region even got better. What the heck is going on here? I could not believe this difference. And it was it was not something you'd have to go back and forth to hear a bunch of times to try and decide if in fact you heard a difference. The difference was right there. It was clear as can be. So that started the journey. It's okay, what's going on here? And learning everything that's going on from the wall socket to the gear, and how much all that RF noise and all that electromagnetic interference really affects what we hear. It affects everything in the signal path. And I was totally amazed and totally blown away. So that was the beginning of a journey. And today I'm here to tell you, not only does that stuff make a difference, there's a balancing act in there in the filtering. You can easily go too far. You can go overboard with it and ruin everything. It can be, you can collapse the soundstage, make it dark, suck the music and the life right out of it by over filtering it. So there's no one size fits all. I can't say this is the best power cable, use this power cable. There is no best power cable. Every application is different. There's a different amount of noise. And each type of electronics are different. We're in a rural area out here in Texas. There may be just a few neighbors sharing my transformer out there somewhere on a pole. The cables are underground, going probably 600-800 feet underground to reach my house. I don't have the noise levels that I would have if I were in the city. I've got buddies in the Dallas area and stuff that their noise levels were off the chart. So what I need here for power conditioning or power cables isn't necessarily what's needed there. And to further illustrate that point, we would notice a huge difference when we go to the shows. We would have a system set up, and would have it set up here at my place, and have it all dialed in, and everything sounding exactly like we want it. We're getting that huge sound stage and resolution levels, bass, everything perfect. Get to the show, set it up, and now we're plugging everything into the power at a large hotel in the middle of a city. And boy, does it change. The noise levels are off the chart. There's tons of things plugged in to that hotel all over the place. There's interference everywhere. Now the level of conditioning all of a sudden has to go way up. That didn't even sound like it did when we were at home. We've got to start all over, try some different power cables, power conditioning, different things that we have to do. That's what really drove me to creating a system that was almost completely off the grid. The system behind me now, as you guys may already know, is running on big AGM batteries. The computer, the hard drive, the DAC, the preamp, all that stuff off the grid, and makes a huge difference. Because I know when we take this stuff to the show, that battery is going to sound the same at the show as it did here. It's always the same. It never changes. The electricity completely changes everywhere. And not only is electricity different everywhere, but the gear that you use is different. A lot of manufacturers dial in or create a lot of filtering within a piece of electronics. And I'll give you an example. I had a young guy came back in the end of the summer, early fall, I think, and from Canada, brought some electronics here for me to demo. And it was an all-in-one integrated amplifier with a DAC, and it worked through streaming music to it through Roon, I think. And we took that unit and we put it in the exact same spot that my 300B tube amp was sitting. That's a 300B tube amp sitting right back there. And just moved that and set that there, and just unplugged my amp and plugged the same power cable right into his big integrated amp. And we began to listen, and it wasn't there. It was dark. The soundstage was somewhat collapsed. There was no real resolution. It wasn't there. It wasn't making it. And I had to tell the guy, look, it sounds to me like it's overdamped. There's too much conditioning. And I know he was boastful before about telling me how much conditioning that there was built into the unit, and that power cables and things like that would have no effect on this piece of gear because it had so much rejection in there that it would clean it all up and everything would be great. I said, I think it's too much. He said, no, I think it just isn't burned in good enough yet. I said, no, I know what burn in sounds like. This isn't it. Let's try something. So I went out to the shop and got an 11-foot power cable, Furatech ends, vampire wire, continuous cast copper, counter-rotated on a polyethylene tube with the ground wire through the center of it. It was a nice cable. There was filtering and everything going on by the geometry of the cable, some noise canceling, but it was a 4-wire braid, so not as aggressive in the noise canceling as the cables that we had in it. And the cables that we had on it was plugged into a balanced power supply. That was then plugged into an Uber bus. That was then plugged into the wall, and they had good cables all along. So there was a lot of conditioning going on. With the condition that he had in his integrated, it was too much. So when we plugged that thing straight into the wall, the whole thing opened up. The resolution was good, the detail levels were good, the imaging, all that was really good. It completely transformed that system by what power cable or what power conditioning we had in line with it. And that's very typical of a lot of digital or Class D amplifiers. And another guy that has a company that makes little bitty Class D amplifiers, they're named after a fruit or something, and they were sent to me to audition. And I noticed the same thing with those. And that particular guy claims that the cables will make no difference with his gear because his gear is engineered so well, you won't notice a difference. All that conditioning and everything of the power is all taking place in his power supply. That thing was super sensitive to power supplies and power conditioning cables. Anything you plugged into it made a complete difference, and that's just typical of that type of gear. And even though there's filtering and things going on inside, that doesn't mean that that's controlling all of it. And it could over-filter a lot of it, especially when you're using really good power cables or a power conditioner in line with it. It can be too much. And it's a total balancing act. One time, Eric Heider came from DB Audio Labs, and he brought a stack of DACs with him. And we're going to audition a bunch of different DA converters. They had different output coupling caps. And he had a power cable that he felt like was the power cable. I want to say it was a $500 or $600 power cable, and it was nicely built, man. It was nice. And he said that cable sounds the best with his DACs. So, okay. So, plugged it in to the balanced power supply, which again had an Uber bus in line with it. It was really dark sounding. Did not sound good. So, plugged my cable from one of my amplifiers into it. Sounded fantastic. Sounded really good. But if we took the cable that he brought and plugged it straight into the wall without any conditioning, that was by far the best sounding cable. It's a matter of just the right amount of conditioning and not over conditioning something. And the differences are astounding. And if you know what to listen for, you notice it immediately. One more story. We went to Rocky Mountain Audio Fest in 2013, and we were setting up a system. Again, Eric was there from DB Audio Labs. We were using his DACs for that room. And there was a group of customers of mine that were there, and a bunch of guys that just wanted to hang out and wanted to see the whole system set up. They want to watch the setup process, which is pretty cool. We set up all the room treatments, and we've been in the room several times, years and years before. We know what to do to the room. We know where to start with the placement of the diffusers and everything. We get the room set up, big 280 watt tube amps, nice everything, fire it all up, and everybody's wooting and hollering, whoo, yeah, that's awesome. Oh, wow, unbelievable. And Eric and I just looked at each other like this. That sounds awful. It is so lifeless. What's happened to this thing? And Eric looked at me and he said, did it sound that way at your house? That didn't sound that way at my house. I said, well, obviously something's changed between there and here. What's different? Power cables are different. Really? Well, we popped right up and switched those power cables out to another set that I brought. The whole thing opened up. Whole soundstage opened up. Clarity, detail, wow. The people in the room were stunned. One, that we even noticed it and knew what it was and what to do, because that's what we do. We have an ear for that. We've learned it. We know exactly what it is and what's causing it. And we knew exactly what to do. Again, the power cables that we initially started with were a cable that introduced a lot of filtering. There was a lot going on there in that cable. And if you're not careful, you can affect things down in the audible range. You're affecting that sine wave. You can make it too dark and too congested real easy if you're not careful with the power cables. But you can also really open things up if you get all that noise off the line. So it's a balancing act. There's no one size fits all. And what I feel like I'm trying to do here with you guys is I'm not trying to make a bunch of money selling you cables. I'm already doing really well with kits and with selling upgrades and stuff for you guys. That's the stuff that I enjoy. But I get questions constantly on, well, what do you recommend for interconnect? What do you recommend for power cables? What do you recommend for speaker cables? I get that all the time. Often I just don't really have a good answer for these guys, or I don't have the answer they're looking for, because the answer is usually a lot more expensive cable than what they're in the market for. They're not interested in the $1,600 a pair interconnect that I might have in the system that for me is worth every penny because they're that good. They're looking for a budget solution. So what's drug me into offering some cables is trying to find that performance level that's way up here, but at a price that's way down here, and try to offer it to my customers so that they have a champagne level performance on that beer budget. And so the way to do that with the speaker cables was simply just to offer those cables as kits and let them do the assembly work. My customers are pretty good at putting kits together, and they're in this as a hobby and enjoying building and making things. Putting ends on the cable, not that big a deal. So the speaker cable kits are doing phenomenal. The feedback I'm getting, overwhelming. These guys are telling me, I was sure there'd be a difference, but I didn't know there'd be that much difference. This is huge. They're going crazy. They're off the charts. That's what I'm looking for. I'm trying to get the rest of you guys kind of up the ladder a little bit. I'm up here and I'm trying to drag you along with me. I'm trying to get you along for the ride. And once I get you along for the ride and get you up the levels a little bit, I know that will be appreciated a lot more than if I were simply trying to sell you something. And it's the same way with the power cables. We've reached a level here to where we've come up with something that's really good for not a lot of money. And when I say for not a lot of money, I mean competing against the $6,000 and $8,000 cables out there with something that's a couple $100 is a bargain. And in fact, I just had a customer, a good friend of mine down south of me, that I sent 3 of these things to. And in his system, he had an $8,000 power cable and a bunch of $2,000 FureTech power cables. Swapped them all out for these and said, wow, it just opened the whole system up. Soundstage is more open, more detailed, everything. Loved it. Wants more of them. Great. That's what I'm looking for. That's the companies that I'm competing against, but at this price point way down here. This cable, there's a lot involved in making this cable, and there's a lot of man hours involved in the assembly process. And I first thought, well, I'll do the same thing as the speaker cable and offer it as a kit. And I know a lot of my customers will whip these things together without a lot of problem. And they'll spend 2 or 3 hours on the assembly process and they've got a great cable. But there's also that guy out there that's going to wire this wrong, and he's going to short out his whole breaker box back there or catch his house on fire. So we decided we'll spend the time and the money and do the assembly on these and make sure they're correct before they go out the door. So there's a little more money's built in, there's a little more cost built in than I'd like, but these are still dirt cheap compared to everything else out there that I'd love you guys to compare these to. This starts at $259, and it goes up depending on how long you want to make them. And then we've got a newer model that incorporates a lot more tweaks than this B16 cable. This is a 16 braid cable. The 24 braid has got quite a few other things done to it that make it a lot more time consuming to assemble and a lot more expensive. And I'm still waiting on a bunch of parts to get here to be able to offer those fully assembled. So we'll start production of those in a few weeks. For right now, this one's on the website. Maybe by the time this launches, we may have some information up on the other one as well. But yeah, we're trying to offer bang for the buck. I'm not trying to offer you some kind of snake oil. And I know a lot of you guys out there with real budget systems, you think, man, $200 and something for a cable? That seems like a lot for a cable when you're at the budget levels. And for a lot of you guys, it may seem that way. But if you try it and you listen to it and you feel like that it's worth it, then it's worth it. What I'm going to do with you guys is offer a money-back guarantee on these cables. You can try them for 30 days, hook them up to your system, replace all of your power cables, let these things burn in for a week or two. Yeah, they have to burn in. I know that's going to make the flat earth guys' heads explode because they don't think cables burn in, but this polyethylene dielectric material takes a while to form. It's going to change a little bit over time. Trust me. Throw it in the system, let it play for a week, put a couple weeks on it if you can, then really start listening. Listen and enjoy it and grasp what's going on, and then take them out and put your old stuff back in. If this isn't worth the money, send them back. I'll give you your money back. You got nothing to lose. This is no games, making it easy for you. You can try it for free. If you don't like it, send it back. No problem. I'm pretty confident that not too many of these are going to come back because it's that good. It's that big a difference. So for some of you guys on the fence, keep that in mind. It's an easy solution. I want to drag you along. I want to get you up this performance ladder a little bit. And the way to do that is to try it and listen. Don't listen to the guys out there that are trying to tell you double blind tests and measurements and this, and we can't measure this. They're not even measuring the right thing. They're not even doing science because they're not spending the time to observe the effect. It means they're not even listening to see if the result matches the theory. You have to listen. This is all about listening. The whole hobby is about listening and enjoying listening to music. So you got to listen. Now, next, I may do one more video after this and do questions and answers and touch on a couple of other things that I may have felt like I wanted to go back and touch on. If you've got questions, send me questions. If you're just out there wanting to bash the whole idea, if you know you're one of those guys that's holding to the belief system that cables don't matter, just hold your breath. You're not helping anybody. You're not helping the industry. You're just hurting the industry, and you're keeping people at a level where their music enjoyment is not going to go up. And my goal is to bring you up. So that's it for this episode. Please hit the subscribe button if you haven't, and let's get those subscribers up. I love it that you guys join in every week. And that's it for this episode. Hang in there. More to come.